The Galactic Empire's rule stretched across thousands of star systems, a colossus of war and dominion that had endured for over 1,000 years. Entire civilizations had been brought to heel beneath its banners, their cultures assimilated, or erased. Their fleets numbered in the millions, with world-killing dreadnoughts patrolling the trade lanes, ensuring absolute control. The Empire's doctrine was simple. Those who obeyed thrived under its rule. Those who resisted disappeared. But on the fringes of this seemingly unshakable dominion, something impossible was happening. A lone warship, small by Imperial standards, insignificant by their fleet compositions, had emerged from the depths of uncharted space. It bore no Imperial insignia, no identification codes recognizable by their vast database. And yet, it did not transmit distress signals. It did not request docking. It did not attempt to flee. It moved with the precision of a predator. At the heart of this warship, deep within the reinforced command deck, the crew stood in eerie silence. A skeleton force, smaller than even a single Imperial garrison, yet trained beyond the limits of ordinary soldiers. Each of them was chosen not by rank or heritage, but by something far rarer: sheer, unyielding skill. They were not just officers. They were tacticians, engineers, strategists, and warriors. And at the center of it all stood the ship's captain. His hands rested lightly on the control interface, his eyes scanning the tactical display before him. His vessel, the culmination of centuries of human warfare, was an enigma to the Empire. It was smaller than their battleships, yet armed with technology that had never been recorded in any Imperial archive. It was not just a ship. It was a statement, a single message, carved in fire and steel. The Galactic Empire had never feared humanity. Not truly. They had dismissed them as primitive expansionists, capable of aggression, but incapable of threatening their dominance. The Empire had allowed them to grow in their insignificant corner of the galaxy, believing them too weak, too fractured to challenge the status quo. They had not realized their mistake. Not yet. The ship's sensors flared to life, detecting movement at the edge of the system. 3 Imperial patrol vessels. Their designs were sleek, elegant, their hulls marked with the unmistakable insignia of the Empire's enforcement arm. Alone, any one of them was powerful enough to obliterate a lesser species' homeworld. They carried the weight of a civilization that had conquered hundreds before them. And yet, they did not realize they were not the hunters this time. Deep, within the Imperial Command Center aboard one of the vessels, a low-ranking officer frowned at the unidentified contact on his display. It was anomalous. Too well armored to be a civilian transport, too silent to be a distress beacon. He sent a hailing signal. Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted Imperial space. Transmit identification codes immediately or prepare to be boarded. Static. He repeated the transmission. No response. The officer scowled, sending an encrypted query to Central Command. It would take time for High Command to respond, but for now, protocol dictated their next action. Activate interdiction protocols. Weapons to stand by. The 3 vessels adjusted their formation, surrounding the lone warship. Their weapons primed, locking onto their target. It was routine, just another encounter with an unregistered ship. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing to be concerned about. And then, the human warship moved. It was subtle at first, a shift in trajectory, a minute adjustment of thrusters. But then, in less than a heartbeat, it accelerated with a force that defied logic. The ship twisted between the Imperial vessels with impossible agility, its hull shimmering as energy barriers activated. And before the Imperial officers could even comprehend what was happening, the human warship fired. A beam of light, silent and precise, lanced through the void. Not crude plasma, not ionized bursts, but something else entirely. The first Imperial ship never stood a chance. Its shields flickered once, twice, before its hull was sheared apart, as if struck by the fury of a dying star. A single shot. That was all it took. Panic erupted aboard the remaining 2 vessels. Alarm klaxons blared as officers scrambled for answers. Impossible! What kind of weapon? "Shields at full! Return fire! Return fire!" But it was already too late. The lone warship danced between their volleys, its movement not guided by traditional thruster arrays, but by something far more advanced. Its silhouette blurred, shifting between visual spectrums, confusing their targeting systems. The second vessel launched a full spread of warheads, dozens of tracking missiles, each capable of leveling a small moon. The warship barely flinched. In a fraction of a second, automated countermeasures engaged, projecting electromagnetic distortions, sending false telemetry data. The missiles veered off course, colliding into one another in a chain reaction that left nothing but spiraling debris. And then, with an almost surgical precision, the warship closed in on its second target. This time, it did not fire from a distance. It accelerated straight toward the enemy vessel, weaving through desperate blasts of defensive fire. At the last possible moment, its forward-mounted railgun, an ancient human invention perfected over centuries, spoke once. A single hyperdense projectile, traveling at near relativistic speed, struck the second Imperial ship. Its armor, designed to withstand nuclear bombardment, might as well have been made of glass. The impact shattered the vessel from within, tearing through decks, severing power conduits, and rupturing the reactor core. The explosion lit up the void like a dying star. The final Imperial vessel, realizing the impossibility of the situation, did what no Imperial officer had ever been trained to do. It ran. Engines at full burn, it attempted to flee, broadcasting emergency signals to the nearest battle group. But the warship was already upon it. The captain of the human vessel watched the last enemy attempt to escape. He let them run for precisely 20 seconds. Then, with the cold efficiency of someone who had long since accepted the nature of war, he gave the command. A final burst of energy erupted from the warship's primary cannon. A pulse of destruction so precise, so absolute, that it did not simply destroy the final Imperial ship. It erased it. No wreckage, no survivors. Nothing left but atoms drifting in the void. The Galactic Empire had ruled unchallenged for over 1,000 years. That era had just ended. And this was only the beginning. The Imperial battle group stationed in the nearby sector had no idea what had just transpired. Their ships patrolled the region like they had for centuries, confident in their supremacy, unchallenged by any force within the Empire's vast domain. Reports of unidentified vessels were common. Smugglers, rebels, lost, traders who had strayed too close to restricted space. Nothing ever came of it. But as the desperate distress signal from the last surviving Imperial ship flickered across their comms, confusion spread like wildfire. This can't be right," an officer muttered as he analyzed the transmission. The message was brief, garbled, almost incomprehensible, cut off before any detailed report could be made. But what little remained told an unthinkable story. 3 Imperial vessels had engaged an unknown warship. Seconds later, their signals had vanished. Not one had survived. That was impossible. "Triangulate the origin," barked Commodore Ralvok, his reptilian features tightening in irritation. He had commanded Imperial fleets for over 3 centuries. He had witnessed planetary bombardments, led suppression campaigns against insurgent factions, crushed rebellions before they could gain traction. There was no force in the galaxy that could eliminate an entire patrol wing that quickly. None. And yet, something had. A tactical display flickered to life in the dimly lit bridge of the ISS Tyrant, the command ship of the Imperial 46th Battle Group. Nearly 100 warships formed its ranks, from smaller escort frigates to the colossal dreadnoughts that carried weapons capable of reducing planets to rubble. Ralvok's narrow pupils darted across the star chart. The skirmish had taken place near Dara 9, a barren system of little consequence. No known colonies, no strategic assets, no fleet movements, just an empty void, and a single, unknown warship. The Commodore exhaled sharply, his mandibles clicking. In annoyance, "Open a direct channel to Imperial High Command," the communications officer hesitated. "Sir, High Command does not normally—" "I don't care what they normally do," Ralvok snapped. 3 of our ships have been obliterated by a single vessel. I want to know what they know about this anomaly. Now." The officer swallowed and obeyed. A secure transmission was established, stretching across the vast distances of Imperial space, connecting to the heart of the Empire's military intelligence. Minutes passed in tense silence before a distorted figure appeared on the bridge's holodisplay, a being clad in high-ranking Imperial regalia, their features obscured by a shroud of digital encryption. Commodore Ralvok. Your report? Ralvok straightened. We have lost contact with Patrol Wing Oryx. 3 vessels. No survivors. The figure did not react. There was no distress call? The voice asked. There was, Ralvok replied. A brief one. Incomplete, but the implications are clear. They were destroyed in moments. Still, the figure remained unnervingly calm. Ralvok narrowed his eyes. You know what this is, don't you? A pause. Then, finally, a response. Proceed with caution. We are authorizing full military engagement. The anomaly must not escape. Ralvok stiffened. That was not an answer. It was an order, a dismissal. But the Commodore was no fool. The way the message was delivered, the lack of surprise in the response. High Command was aware of something they had never shared with the fleet. Something about this warship. Something about its origin. Something they feared. Deploy battle group, Ralvok commanded, pushing, his suspicions aside for now. Full formation, all weapons primed. Across the vastness of space, Imperial warships activated their thrusters. Shields flared to life, weapon systems charged, targeting arrays scanned the void for any trace of the unknown enemy. The fleet's presence was overwhelming. Enough firepower to raise entire star systems. And yet, as the ISS Tyrant led its battle group toward the last known coordinates of the anomaly, Ralvok could not shake an unsettling feeling crawling down his spine. Feeling he had never known before, a feeling eerily close to fear. Meanwhile, aboard the human warship, the bridge of the human vessel was silent. The crew worked in eerie synchrony, adjusting controls with precise efficiency. Holographic displays flickered around them, feeding real-time tactical data into their neural interfaces. The captain sat in his command chair, watching as enemy movements unfolded on his screens. His ship's sensors had detected the incoming battle group before the first Imperial warship had even begun its approach. He was not surprised. They took the bait, the tactical officer murmured. An entire battle group. We expected this. The captain nodded, his expression unreadable. They won't underestimate us now, he said. But that won't save them. The warship had been designed for a singular purpose. Not to fight wars in the traditional sense, but to render them obsolete. Every system, every weapon, every technological advancement embedded within its hull was the culmination of humanity's long history of warfare. It was not the largest warship in the galaxy. It was not the most imposing. But it was, without question, the deadliest. The Empire had ruled for over 1,000 years through sheer force. Their tactics had become predictable. Their doctrines, rigid. Their arrogance, absolute. They did not realize they were facing something that had studied them, adapted, evolved. The ship's AI flickered to life, its voice an emotionless whisper across the bridge. Multiple hostiles detected. Estimated firepower. Extreme. Recommended course of action. Engagement. The captain exhaled slowly. The moment of reckoning was approaching. This will be their first real fight, he muttered. And their last. Then he gave the order. Prepare for engagement. At the edge of the system, the Imperial fleet surged forward, their formations tightening, weapons primed. But then, something changed. On the bridge of the ISS Tyrant, Commodore Ralvok watched as his targeting scanners began fluctuating. Sensor feeds glitched, flickering between false signals and distorted readings. What is happening? He demanded. The chief operations officer struggled to find an answer. Sir, our targeting systems are being scrambled. We're receiving dozens of false signatures. It's as if the enemy ship is everywhere at once. Ralvok's claws gripped the armrests of his command chair. That wasn't possible. No known technology could manipulate Imperial targeting systems to such an extent. Then, suddenly, the unknown warship moved. It appeared out of nowhere, tearing through the void like a wraith, impossibly fast. The first Imperial ship never even saw it coming. A burst of light, so intense it overloaded visual sensors, flashed across the system. A pulse of destruction lanced through the lead cruiser's hull, cutting through it as if it were nothing more than air. The ship detonated instantly, torn apart in a cataclysmic eruption of fire and debris, and before the fleet could even react, the warship vanished again. Panic spread like wildfire across the Imperial formation. Officers shouted orders, battle. Algorithms failed to lock on. Weapons fired blindly into empty space. But Ralvok knew they were already dead. And this was only the beginning. The Imperial fleet was in chaos. Commodore Ralvok had seen battle before. He had faced planetary insurrections, led war campaigns against entire civilizations, and crushed fleets that had dared defy the Empire. He had spent centuries refining his tactics, adapting to enemies both primitive and advanced. But this was something else entirely. The unknown warship was unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. It did not move like a conventional vessel, nor did it engage in traditional fleet combat. It was a phantom, an executioner, striking with precision and vanishing before counterattacks could even be attempted. Ralvok's claws clenched around the armrests of his command throne as his ships scrambled to respond. "Full fleet synchronization," he barked. "Coordinate targeting data and recalibrate tracking systems. I want that ship found, now!" The ISS Tyrant's tactical officers worked feverishly. Imperial warships fired spreads of high-energy pulses and particle lances into the void, hoping to catch the enemy in the barrage. But the warship had already moved. Sensors flickered. A distortion. In space. Then, another explosion. A heavy Imperial battleship, the Vorgzath. A vessel 3 kilometers long and plated in armor that could withstand the wrath of dying stars, suddenly lurched as a precise cutting beam sliced through its central hull. The energy shields meant to withstand planetary bombardments flared and collapsed instantly. One moment, the battleship was whole. The next, it was splitting in half, torn apart by forces the crew could barely comprehend. On the bridge of the ISS Tyrant, silence fell as Ralvok and his officers watched the massive warship come apart, its wreckage drifting into the void. The screams of its thousands of crewmen silenced in an instant. Impossible. A single enemy ship had just eliminated a fully armed Imperial battleship. With ease, Ralvok's instincts screamed at him. This was no ordinary enemy. This was something different, something dangerous, and the fleet had no idea how to fight it. Aboard the human warship, the bridge was silent, save for the soft hum of the ship's systems processing vast streams of tactical data. The enemy fleet was reacting as predicted. Erratic movements, desperation creeping into their maneuvers. The death of their battleship had sent shockwaves through their ranks. They had underestimated humanity, as expected. Captain Marcus Vale observed the battle from his command seat, his face calm and unreadable. His eyes flickered over the holographic displays, enemy formations adjusting, ships repositioning in a futile attempt to encircle his warship. They didn't realize that positioning was meaningless. Not against a vessel like his. "This is getting predictable," muttered the tactical officer, Lieutenant Sarek. "They still think in terms of fleet engagements. They don't understand." "They will," Marcus said. The Empire was ancient, its tactics stagnant, its commanders overconfident in their numbers and firepower. They had spent centuries crushing lesser species, believing themselves untouchable. And now, for the first time, they were facing something that was beyond their comprehension. A warship designed for total dominance. A warship forged in the crucible of human war doctrine, where adaptability, innovation, and ruthlessness were the deciding factors of battle. "AI," Marcus commanded, his voice level. "Predictive analysis." A soft chime. The ship's artificial intelligence Echo responded with its cold, emotionless voice. "Enemy fleet cohesion is degrading. Estimated tactical collapse in 4 minutes. Primary target prioritization updated. Calculating next strike." A set of targeting markers appeared on the display. Marcus studied them for a moment before nodding. "They still think they have the advantage," he murmured. "Let's take that illusion away." He turned to the helm. "Engage strike pattern Omega." The warship moved. The nightmare begins. On the Imperial fleet's flagship, Ralvok was watching in growing horror as his fleet was hunted. The unknown vessel flickered in and out of existence, moving faster than anything in the Imperial database. One moment, it was at the edge of their formation, and in the blink of an eye, it was inside their ranks, striking with absolute precision. A destroyer exploded in a blinding flash. A cruiser lost its engines and spun helplessly into deep space. Another battleship took a direct hit from what appeared to be a kinetic projectile moving at near relativistic speeds, tearing through its hull as if it were made of paper. And then, it was gone again. No ship in the Imperial arsenal could do this. No force in the known galaxy could do this. Ralvok's mind raced. "What are we fighting?" He turned to his bridge officers. "Where is it? Find it!" The sensors officer was panicking. "Sir, we—" An alert blared. New data scrolled across. The tactical display. Ralvok's breath caught. The unknown warship was heading straight for the ISS Tyrant. The killing blow. For the first time in centuries, Ralvok felt something that no Imperial officer had ever dared feel. Dread. The ISS Tyrant was the mightiest ship in this fleet. It carried weapons that could level continents, shields designed to withstand entire armadas, and enough firepower to kill civilizations. And yet, as the enemy ship closed in, none of that mattered. "Incoming!" the weapons officer shouted. "Brace for—" The human warship appeared out of nothingness. It wasn't just fast. It was bending the very fabric of space, cheating physics itself. The Empire had no equivalent, no defense. And then it fired. The beam that erupted from the human warship was unlike anything ever seen in Imperial history. It wasn't an energy weapon in the traditional sense. It wasn't plasma, nor was it particle-based. It was something far more terrifying. Pulse of exotic energy, a controlled burst of devastation that didn't just strike the ISS Tyrant. It rewrote reality where it hit. The shields failed instantly. The armor, reinforced over generations, unraveled at the molecular level. The hull ceased to exist. The bridge of the ISS Tyrant trembled violently as alarm screamed. Ralvok felt his body lift from his seat as the entire ship tilted unnaturally, as if reality itself was rejecting its presence. This isn't a weapon, he realized in horror. This is an execution. He barely had time to think before the ship began tearing itself apart. The last thing Commodore Ralvok saw before his vessel ceased to exist was the warship turning away, its hull gleaming in the dim light of the dying battle. Not a single human transmission had been received. No demands, no warnings, just silence. Then everything went dark. The Imperial fleet, once a symbol of unmatched might, was now a graveyard. Shattered hulls drifted lifelessly in the void, once proud battleships reduced to mangled wreckage. Fires burned in the vacuum, fueled by exposed reactor cores still hemorrhaging energy into space. Escape pods and emergency shuttles attempted to flee, tiny specks of light scattering from the destruction like frightened insects. But there was no salvation. The unknown warship lingered at the edge of the devastation, watching, waiting. It did not pursue the fleeing escape craft, not yet. It had already demonstrated its superiority. Now, it observed. And for the first time in Imperial history, there was no counterattack, no strategy, no retaliation, only silence. The final moments of Ralvok the ISS Tyrant was gone. Commodore Ralvok had felt his flagship's death as though it had been his own. He should have perished with it. But fate had decided otherwise. He floated in the wreckage of his fleet, enclosed in the shattered remains of a once magnificent command pod, emergency oxygen hissing through cracked seals. His once pristine uniform was tattered, his body bruised and bleeding from the violent decompression. And yet, his mind was still sharp, still reeling. He had never seen anything like this. He had never imagined an enemy could do this. His fleet had not simply been defeated. It had been hunted, dissected, erased. This wasn't war, this was revenge. But why? Through the fractured visor of his helmet, Ralvok saw the human warship still hovering in the void, its form sleek, menacing, perfectly still, like a predator deciding if the hunt was over. Then, for the first time, it sent out a transmission, Simple message, relayed on all open channels. Ralvok barely had the strength to process the words. But when he did, his body went cold. Your empire is not prepared for what is coming. A pulse of energy crackled through space, disabling all remaining Imperial distress signals, leaving no chance for his message to reach the Empire. And then, the human warship vanished. The Empire reacts on the Imperial homeworld of HFY. Deep within the grand chambers of the Imperial War Council, an urgent distress beacon flickered onto the vast central display. High Lord Kethrax, one of the oldest and most feared commanders in the Empire, scowled as he watched the transmission. The ISS Tyrant was missing. The entire 57th Fleet, obliterated. An enemy had engaged and destroyed an entire Imperial battle group, and not a single distress call had made it through. The surviving black box data, retrieved from a last-minute transmission, told an impossible story. A single warship had done this. Impossible, one of the War Council members growled. This data must be incorrect. Kethrax studied the fragments of information. He was not a fool. He had waged countless wars, had seen anomalies before. But nothing like this. No enemy had ever done this. A single ship evading an entire fleet. A single ship erasing battleships in an instant. And now, it had disappeared, leaving only a warning. Your empire is not prepared for what is coming. Kethrax's claws drummed against the polished table. He looked at the gathered warlords and admirals. This is not an isolated incident, he murmured. This is an opening move. The chamber fell into silence, and for the first time in Imperial history, the War Council felt something they had never felt before. Fear. The truth about humanity. The Imperial archives recorded many conquests, many exterminated species, many enslaved civilizations. Some had fought bravely, some had died without ever knowing who had destroyed them. But there was one race that had never been recorded in the archives, one race that had been forgotten, or rather, erased. Long ago, before the Empire had reached its current might, there had been a war unlike any other. A war against an enemy that refused to die. An enemy that adapted, that fought with the kind of desperation only a species on the brink of extinction could muster. And when the war became too costly, the Empire made a decision. They declared humanity unworthy of existence. They launched a galactic purge, believing they had crushed the last remnants of the species before they could ever become a threat. For centuries, the Empire believed humanity was gone. But humanity had not died. They had simply vanished. They had retreated into the abyss, into the void between the stars, into the forgotten corners of the galaxy. They had spent generations evolving, advancing, waiting. And now, they had returned, with weapons beyond understanding, with technology that defied reason, with a warship that could erase entire fleets. And this was only the beginning. The message spreads. As news of the battle spread through the Imperial High Command, a ripple of unease swept across the galaxy. The greatest empire in history had been challenged, not by an armada, not by an invading force, but by a single warship. No one knew where it had come from. No one knew how many more existed. But one thing was clear. Humanity had returned. And this time, they were not here to negotiate. The Imperial War Council Chamber, a massive obsidian structure floating above HFY, was built to be an unshakable pillar of dominance, a place where strategies were formed, invasions were planned, and trillions of lives were decided with a single command. But now, there was only silence. The vast holographic display flickered, replaying the limited data they had recovered from the wreckage of the 57th Fleet. The fragmented sensor logs revealed blinding lances of energy, ships disintegrating before they could fire a second shot, and an enemy vessel moving with impossible precision, weaving between capital ships like a specter of death. Fleet Lord Kethrax leaned forward, his scaled fingers tightening into a fist. His eyes, once filled with nothing but contempt for lesser species, now gleamed with something far more dangerous: doubt. This ship, he growled, his voice barely above a whisper, is not a rogue anomaly. This is a warning shot, a declaration of war One of the lesser admirals scoffed. "We have wiped out entire starfaring species. We have crushed fleets numbering in the millions. This is nothing more than a surviving relic of some failed resistance." Kethrax slowly turned his gaze toward the admiral, his predatory glare slicing through the arrogance in the room. "Then tell me," he said, voice like grinding metal, "why is there no record of this ship's existence? Why has no intelligence network reported on it? Why did it dismantle an entire Imperial fleet in under an hour?" The room fell into an uneasy silence. Then, another warlord, an elder strategist named Zorvel, spoke up, his voice far calmer but no less concerned. "We assumed them extinct," he admitted. "We believed humanity had been eradicated long before our grandest wars. It was a species without recorded history, without survivors, without even a grave site to mark its demise. And yet," Kethrax murmured, gazing at the holographic wreckage of the 57th Fleet, "here they are. A name buried in blood long before the Empire's golden age, before its rise as a galactic superpower. There had been wars. Many of them were quick conquests, species falling before the might of the Zephyrian military like dry leaves in a storm. But one war had lasted too long. It had been costly, brutal, terrifying. The species they fought had been outnumbered, outgunned, and pushed to the edge of extinction. Yet they had refused to break. They had adapted, learned, fought smarter than any race the Empire had encountered before. The war should have lasted a year. It lasted 4 decades. In the end, the Empire decided it was not worth the resources. They deployed planet crackers, ignited atmospheric burners, sent out biological plagues designed to rewrite DNA itself. The species known as humanity was erased from history, or so they believed, because something had survived. Something had escaped into the dark, and now, centuries later, something had returned. The impossible ship, the vessel that had annihilated the 57th Fleet, had no Imperial designation, no recorded engine signature, no known weapon type, no communications, profile that matched any species within the galactic database. It was not built for intimidation. It was built for destruction. Its movements were unnatural, not bound by the limitations of known physics. It didn't drift or rely on conventional thrust mechanics. It moved like it thought, faster than light itself. Its weapons were an abomination of science, seemingly defying the very principles of energy, conservation. The beams it fired didn't simply damage ships. They deleted them from existence. There were no escape pods, no survivors. Those caught in its range were simply gone, and worst of all, it let some escape. Not because it couldn't catch them, but because it wanted them to run, to spread fear, to tell the Empire, "We are still here, and we are watching." Strategic preparations. Kethrax turned toward his gathered warlords. "We cannot dismiss this as an anomaly. This is not a rebellion. This is a calculated move from an enemy we do not understand." "What do you propose?" another admiral asked cautiously. The fleet lord's expression hardened. "We send an armada. Not just a fleet, an entire invasion force. We find this ship, track its origins, and crush whatever remnants of humanity still exist before they can become a true threat." His words were met with hesitation. Not long ago, such an order would have been met with cheers of conquest, of imperial pride. But now, there was an unspoken realization in the room. An empire that had once eradicated humanity was now afraid of its ghost. The unseen threat. Even as the Imperial fleets mobilized, warships preparing for an offensive campaign across uncharted sectors, the human warship had already disappeared. It had watched. It had listened. It had studied their response, and it had learned. Deep in the abyss, where no sensors could reach, a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen waited in the shadows, silent, perfectly still. Each ship bore no markings, no insignia, only a single black emblem, ancient yet unbroken, a symbol buried in history, a reminder of the past, a warning of the future. And at the heart of it all, a single warship led the way, not hunting, not conquering, waiting. Because humanity did not start fights, but it never left them unfinished. The vast Imperial core systems hummed with activity as the Zephyrian war machine rumbled to life. Across 70 star systems, thousands of warships, from swift raider frigates to planet-cracking dreadnoughts, were being recalled, rearmed, and redeployed. Massive shipyards worked at maximum capacity, their forges belching fire as new hulls were welded together in haste. Across the fleet, every ship's captain, every battle-hardened admiral, every cybernetically augmented strategist was issued the same chilling directive. The enemy is no longer extinct. Is no longer. You will exterminate them before they become unstoppable. The declaration sent ripples of uncertainty through the ranks. An entire species, thought eradicated centuries ago, was still alive, still fighting. The implications were staggering. The Grand Imperial Armada had never been assembled in its entirety. Not even in the wars that had forged the Empire itself. Now it would be. At the heart of the formation sat 3 doomsday dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, equipped with weapons capable of reducing entire planets to rubble. Among them was the jewel of the Empire, the Executioner, a fortress-class warship outfitted with an entropy cannon, a device capable of ripping apart reality itself. Its plasma-laced spinal weaponry could pierce through continent-sized asteroids, its hull reinforced with graviton-hardened alloys that could withstand supernova-level forces. No enemy had ever survived the Executioner's wrath. This was overkill. But Kethrax did not care. The Empire had learned its lesson centuries ago. You did not give humanity the chance to fight back. Not again. The hunt begins. The Imperial Armada deployed in waves, spreading like a metallic storm across the void. Scout flotillas were sent ahead, equipped with the most advanced hyperspatial sensors, capable of detecting the faintest ion trails and residual warp signatures. They swept across the outer systems like bloodhounds, searching for any sign of the Phantom warship. But it was as if the vessel had never existed. The human warship had left no traces, no fuel emissions, no wreckage, no energy decay. Even the battle site of the 57th Fleet held nothing but ghostly echoes in the void. To the Empire, this was impossible. No ship, not even the most advanced cloaking vessels, could evade their sensor net so completely. Yet, one by one, the scout ships began to disappear. No distress calls, no sensor pings, just silence. Fleet Lord Kethrax sat aboard his command vessel, his claws tapping against his armrest. His war council, seated at a grand table beneath the holographic star map, watched in grim silence as red markers, indicating a lost ships, flickered out across the sector. This, an admiral muttered, his voice unsteady. This isn't a hunt, it's an execution. The realization sent a cold wave through the war council. Somehow they were not the hunters, they were the prey. The trap closes, then the first survivor was found. A crippled stealth corvette, barely holding together, was discovered adrift in deep space. Its hull was scarred with precision strikes, engines melted down to slag. The warlord in charge of the recovery effort expected to find the crew long dead. Instead, they found something far worse. The bridge was intact, and inside were 12 Zephyrian officers, alive, but utterly broken. They sat in silence, their eyes wide, their claws trembling. They did not scream. They did not speak. They simply stared at the walls, their minds shattered beyond repair. A single message was burned into the corvette's internal systems, seared onto every display screen in blood-red text. We are watching. We are waiting. Run while you still can. Kethrax crushed the holographic report in his fist, his rage barely contained. We do not run, he snarled. We do not fear ghosts. He turned toward the War Council, his voice thunderous. Enough of this cat-and-mouse game. We move the entire fleet. We end this now. Contact. A false victory. The Imperial Armada surged forward, thousands of warships moving as one toward the last recorded anomaly. And then, they found it. The human warship. It drifted in space, alone as before. But something was different. It did not attack. It did not move. It simply waited. Kethrax sneered. Finally, the coward understands its place. With a single command, he ordered every ship within range to fire. The void erupted. Thousands of energy beams, hypervelocity rounds, and quantum torpedoes collided with the lone warship. The explosion was colossal, a blinding supernova that should have turned any vessel into nothing. But molecular dust, the fleet cheered. They had won. And then, the fire cleared and the warship was still there, untouched, unscathed, unbroken. A single transmission cut through the void, overriding the Empire's communications. A voice, deep and distorted, yet unmistakably human. You call this power? The next second, the Armada began to die. The silent massacre. The human warship moved. Not with the slow, predictable maneuvering of Imperial dreadnoughts, but with precision beyond comprehension. It was inside their formations before they could react. The first Imperial battleship, the Dominion Wrath, exploded before its shields could activate. Its reactor detonated from within. A Zephyrian battlecruiser attempted to retreat, only for its entire crew to be atomized, leaving the ship eerily intact, drifting with the silence of a ghost ship. The Executioner, the Empire's most powerful warship, fired its entropy cannon, a weapon that could erase entire moons. The human warship simply vanished. Not dodged, not cloaked. Vanished. A heartbeat later it reappeared behind the dreadnought, and in an instant the Executioner was torn apart from the inside, split into 1,000 glowing fragments, its debris vaporized before it could scatter. Panic overtook the fleet. Imperial warships broke formation, desperate to escape, colliding into one another in their frantic retreat. But there was no escape. There was only annihilation. The human warship had let them gather. It had lured them in, and now it was erasing them. Fleet Lord Kethrak stood frozen, watching the invincible Imperial Armada vanish ship by ship, helpless against something they did not understand. A species they had once destroyed was now destroying them. And deep in the void, beyond the wreckage and fire, more shadows stirred. Humanity had not sent a single warship. It had sent a scout. And now, the rest were coming. The Empire's greatest fear comes true. The Imperial Armada, the mightiest war fleet ever assembled in the history of the Zephyrian Empire, was gone. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, erased in less than an hour. Few who remained were not warriors anymore. They were survivors, their minds shattered beyond repair. They drifted in their escape pods, whispering mad, incoherent words about shadows in the void, about a warship that moved like a phantom, about an enemy that did not die. The Empire had believed in its absolute supremacy, in its eternal dominion. Over the stars, that belief had just been shattered. For the first time in countless millennia, the Zephyrian species felt something they had not experienced since the dawn of their conquest. Fear. It was no longer just about a single warship, no longer about one anomaly that had defied their expectations. Humanity was alive, and they were returning. The message that shook the Empire. From the throne world of Zephyrian Prime, Emperor Malvex sat within his grand war chamber, surrounded by the greatest military minds of his species. A massive holographic projection filled the room, showing the wreckage of the once mighty fleet, now little more than twisted metal drifting in the abyss. It was unreal. It was impossible, and yet the evidence was before them. "My Lord Emperor," a high-ranking warlord stammered, his voice trembling. "We have received a transmission." "From who?" Malvex growled, his claws gripping the edges of his throne. The warlord swallowed hard. "From the humans." The room fell deathly silent. Slowly, the Emperor rose. "Play it!" he commanded. The room darkened as the transmission began. At first, it was just static. Then, a voice. Calm. Cold. Unshaken. "We remember everything." A chill swept through the chamber. The voice continued, unwavering. "We remember what you did. We remember the fires. We remember the slaughter." Across the war chamber, the warlords shifted uncomfortably. Some of them had studied the records, ancient records of a long-dead enemy, an enemy that was supposed to never rise again. But now, the impossible had happened. The voice on the transmission spoke again. "You believed we were weak. You believed we were broken. You believed you had erased us from history. A pause. Then a whisper. You were wrong. And then, for the first time in Zephyrian history, they heard something that had not been spoken in over 1,000 years, a declaration of war. You started this war, now we finish it. The transmission cut out. A heavy silence hung in the chamber. And then alarms blared across the Imperial capital. Something had entered Zephyrian Prime's outer defense zone. Something big. A shadow over the throne world, every planetary defense station, every orbital battleship, every surface-to-space cannon locked onto the unknown presence. It was here, the human warship. But something was wrong. It was not alone. The scanners failed to pick up an exact number. Every sensor readout flickered, glitched, and then failed entirely. But through the naked eye, through the massive viewing stations across Zephyrian Prime, the sky had gone dark. The horizon was filled with warships. Hundreds. No. Thousands. A human armada. The Empire had sent its greatest fleet to eliminate a single human warship, and now, an entire fleet of them had arrived at the Empire's doorstep. Their hulls were sleek, angular, forged from unknown alloys that devoured light itself. Each one pulsed with blue energy veins, their weapons silent yet menacing, as if waiting for the order to unleash hell. The Imperial defenses did not fire, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. Every weapon system had gone offline the moment the humans arrived. Every command console, every targeting system dead. The Empire's most fortified world had been rendered defenseless in an instant. For a species that had ruled the stars with absolute control, this was beyond terror. It was judgment. The final warning. A single transmission was broadcasted across the entire planet. It did not come from a screen. It did not come from speakers. It came from everywhere. Through their communication networks, their personal devices, even their minds. Every Zephyrian heard it, as if it was being whispered directly into their skulls. This is your only warning. You destroyed our worlds. You massacred our people. You tried to erase us from existence. Pause, then, the final words. We are still here. We are stronger than you ever feared. We are your reckoning. And then, the sky ignited. The fall of the Zephyrian Empire. The human fleet did not fire indiscriminately. They did not unleash planetary annihilation. They were precise. The high command bunkers, the government palaces, the Imperial military headquarters, all were hit with surgical precision, not obliterated, but disabled. The Empire's entire ruling structure was paralyzed. And then, the final blow. A massive pulse wave rippled from the human warships. It swept across the planet, passing through every Zephyrian body, every ship, every fortress, but leaving no physical damage. But something had changed. Every Zephyrian soldier, every high-ranking officer, every Imperial citizen suddenly realized something horrifying. They could no longer access their technology. Their weapons did not respond. Their ships would not start. Their cybernetic implants failed. Everything they had relied upon for their dominion over the galaxy was gone. Humanity had not destroyed them. They had simply rendered them powerless, and with that, the humans left, leaving the once mighty Empire broken, crippled, and defenseless. The galaxy would no longer fear the Zephyrian Empire. They would fear something else. The whispers began to spread. Across the stars, through every species, through every surviving Zephyrian world, a name was spoken with awe and dread. A name that had once been nothing but dust and forgotten history. A name that had returned with a vengeance, humanity, and this time, they would never be forgotten again.